Hi, welcome back to Joe Blogs. In today's episode, I want to talk to you about what's going on in the conflict between Israel and Iran and the impact that this is now having on the global economy. Because initially, global markets shrugged off this as being presumably another short lived affair, that it would last for 2 or 3 days and then everything would go back to normal. But we are now into the fifth consecutive day of bombing taking place, and it's going on both sides. And I talked previously about Israel having the Iron Dome protective system, their missile defense system. Iran has managed to get some missiles through that system by apparently sending clusters of bombs and trying to distract the way that the defense systems work. So there have been some casualties on Israel's side, but there have been significantly more casualties in Iran. And Israel is now widening its targets. Initially, it was just focusing in on the enrichment sites for the nuclear development program. However, it's now targeting missile bases. And in a recent incident, it actually attacked a broadcaster that was broadcasting live on air. So let's have a look at this video, which is quite startling. Now, not surprisingly, she wasn't hanging around to actually report on that bomb. She was basically just running for cover to try to save herself. And it was actually reported that 3 people were killed in that attack. And Israel has said that communication is something that they're now targeting. And interestingly, Donald Trump has made a post on Truth Social, which, not surprisingly, we'll have a look at that in a moment. But as part of that post, he's actually recommended that the people in Tehran, the capital of Iran, should evacuate. And there are now scenes circulating on social media of traffic jams through the middle of Tehran. You can see in this footage here that there's basically gridlock. People are fleeing. They're trying to get out of the capital city. They're trying to go to the mountains and higher ground where it will be safe from the missile attacks. But you can see basically there's just a one-way stream of traffic here. And you look at the horizon there where you've got all of these lights, that's basically car headlights. This traffic jam is many miles long. Everybody is getting into their cars to try to evacuate from Tehran. And the Tehran authorities have reached out to the USA and said that they would like to see some sort of mediation happening. So let's hear in a bit more detail as to what's going on right now.
There are 10 million residents in Tehran. There's nowhere to go. The airspaces are closed. People on the ground are talking about massive traffic jams, cars doing anything they can to make it to the mountain areas. And also, for the first time ever, the Israeli military also issued an evacuation notice to District 3 in Tehran, which is home to about 300,000 residents since this war kicked off.
Now, interestingly, when this conflict first started, Iran was being very aggressive in terms of the words that it was using. It was saying Israel was going to pay the price. However, it now looks like Iran wants some sort of peace settlement and for Israel to stop all of the attacks.
Sources say Iran has sent messages through Gulf states to urge US President Donald Trump to pressure Israel to a ceasefire. In return, Tehran says it would show flexibility in nuclear negotiations with the US.
Now, interestingly, what Iran isn't saying is that it will stop its nuclear development program, which is what Israel wants. It wants Iran to basically sign up to say it will never develop any uranium beyond what it needs just for its own internal nuclear development processes.
On Monday, Israel escalated strikes on a number of targets. They include Iran's state broadcaster. A live broadcast was interrupted by a missile, and a news anchor had to flee the studio. Israel claimed the building was serving as a communications center for Iran's military. Israel launched its air war with a surprise attack last Friday, killing top Iranian military commanders and nuclear scientists. Its airstrikes have also put at least 2 of Iran's 3 operating uranium enrichment plants out of action.
We'll go on to look at that in a bit more detail in a moment. We'll have a look at which facilities have been damaged. There's actually been a statement by the IAEA, so we'll go on to hear what the Director General of the IAEA have said about that.
Israel has said its goal is to eliminate Tehran's ability to develop a nuclear weapon. Iran has denied it had plans to build one.
I think it's interesting that Iran has denied that it had any plans to build a nuclear weapon. However, it's not prepared to sign up to a treaty saying that it will never develop nuclear weapons, because if it doesn't have any plans, then surely there's no downside to signing up to that sort of settlement.
Elsewhere on Monday, US President Donald Trump told reporters he was leaving the G7 summit early to return to Washington Monday night, citing the situation in the Middle East. Fox News reported he would convene his National Security Council. Trump has consistently said the Israeli assault could end quickly if Iran agreed to US demands that it accept strict curbs on its nuclear program.
So Donald Trump has left the G7 meeting early because he's taking this very seriously. And he posted on his Truth social media site saying Iran should have signed the deal. I told them to sign. What a shame, a waste of human life. Simply stated, Iran cannot have a nuclear weapon. I said it over and over again. Everyone should immediately evacuate Tehran. And whilst he was at the G7 conference, Donald Trump was asked about whether Iran now wants this conflict to end.
Have you heard any signals or seen any messages from intermediaries that Iran wishes to de-escalate the conflict?
Yeah.
What have you heard? What have you heard from the Iranians?
They'd like to talk, but they should have done that before. I had 60 days, and they had 60 days, and on the 61st day, I said, we don't have a deal. They have to make a deal, and it's painful for both parties, but I'd say Iran is not winning this war, and they should talk, and they should talk immediately before it's too late.
And what would you say, in your opinion, what would it take for the U.S. to get involved in this conflict militarily?
I don't want to talk about that.
So Donald Trump basically is saying there that Iran should have signed the deal in the 60 days that was set out to agree some sort of settlement. And the USA and Iran had 5 separate meetings, but Iran was seen to be stalling in all of those meetings. And Israel has claimed that Iran basically didn't want to sign up to any sort of agreement because they're continuing to enrich their uranium with a view to making a nuclear bomb. That's why Israel launched the attacks. As soon as that 60-day period was over, you heard Donald Trump referring to it there, saying on the 61st day, there wasn't a deal, and then the attacks started. And interestingly, when he was asked whether or not the USA could get drawn into this conflict, he didn't want to be drawn on that topic at all. So the US isn't seen to be standing alongside Israel in terms of the actual fighting. They're basically saying that Iran should come around the table and agree to some sort of deal. And in terms of the official statement from the G7, so these are the 7 countries that Donald Trump was meeting with, that seem to be the 7 biggest nations in the world. They've issued this, which says, we, the leaders of the G7, reiterate our commitment to peace and stability in the Middle East. In this context, we affirm that Israel has a right to defend itself. We reiterated our support for the security of Israel. We also affirm the importance of the protection of civilians. Iran is the principal source of regional instability and terror. We've been consistently clear that Iran can never have a nuclear weapon. We urge that the resolution of the Iranian crisis leads to a broader de-escalation of hostilities in the Middle East, including a ceasefire in Gaza. We will remain vigilant to the implications for international energy markets and stand ready to coordinate, including with like-minded partners, to safeguard market stability. So a very clear message from the G7 there that they see Iran as being the aggressor, even though Israel has launched these attacks and is bombing Iran and more people in Iran are dying. They're basically saying that over the long term, Iran has been the aggressor and has been basically a cause of terror in the region. So they want Iran to sign up to this agreement that they will never have nuclear weapons. Now, in terms of what nuclear facilities there are in Iran, this map shows all of the different facilities that they have, and they're split out into different types. So the green boxes are the research reactors. So that's where they're using enriched uranium for research purposes. So that's enriched up to around 20%. We've then got uranium mines, the red squares, which is where Iran is actually mining its own uranium. we've got a military site in Parchin, and then we've got the nuclear facilities. So we've got Natanz, which is the one that is the above ground facility. Some of it is below ground, but some of it's above ground. That's the one that was attacked primarily by Israel. We've also got Fordo, which is the one that is deep under rock. That's under around about 300 feet of rock. Arak, Isfana, and Bushehr. These are the facilities that Israel is now targeting. And the head of the International Atomic Energy Agency, who work closely with all atomic sites around the world. So this is basically something that was set up in 1957 by President Eisenhower to basically be an independent body that's analysing what's going on in all of these different nuclear facilities across the world. They have said that it is now likely that all 15,000 of the centrifuges in the main site in Iran have been damaged by the recent attacks. So let's hear from him. He's got some more information in terms of what's going on the ground in Iran, because obviously when Iran is being attacked, when it's got missiles landing at these nuclear facilities, there is uranium at those facilities. So there is a potential for radiation leaks and issues for general health. So let's hear, in his expert opinion, exactly what the position is in Iran right now.
There has been no additional damage at the Natanz fuel enrichment plant site since the Friday attack, which destroyed the above-ground part of the pilot fuel enrichment plant, one of the plants at which Iran was producing uranium enriched up to 60% U-235.
Now, I think it's interesting that Iran was enriching to 60% because there's no other reason for doing that but to make a weapon from it. You only need to go to around 20% for research facility purposes, and you only need around 3 to 5% for nuclear reactors for your nuclear power station. So the fact that they're taking it to 60% tells you that the intention realistically was to make some sort of weapon, because what is the point otherwise? Why is Iran doing that? They've denied that they had any intention of making a nuclear weapon, but the head of the independent agency is saying here that Iran had taken it to 60%. So that in itself tells everybody that Iran was aiming to develop some sort of nuclear weapon.
Electricity infrastructure at the facility, which included an electrical substation, a main electric power supply building, an emergency power supply and backup generators, was also destroyed. There has been no indication of a physical attack on the underground cascade hall containing part of the pilot fuel enrichment plant and the main fuel enrichment plant. However, the loss of power to the cascade hall may have damaged the centrifuges located there.
Well, he subsequently said that all 15,000 of those centrifuges have been damaged. So that's a follow-on now that there's basically a lot of work to be done for Iran to get back to where they were.
The level of radioactivity outside the Natanz site has remained unchanged and at normal levels, indicating no external radiological impact to the population or the environment from this event. But let me elaborate a little bit on this, because we have received lots of questions. Within the Natanz facility, there is both radiological and chemical contamination. Considering the type of nuclear material at this facility, it is possible that uranium isotopes contained in uranium hexafluoride, uranyl fluoride, and hydrogen fluoride are dispersed inside the facility. The radiation, primarily consisting of alpha particles, poses a significant danger if uranium is inhaled or ingested. However, this risk can be effectively managed with appropriate protective measures, such as using respiratory protection devices while inside the affected facilities. The main concern inside the facility is the chemical toxicity of the uranium hexafluoride and the fluoride compounds generated at the contact with water.
So what he's saying there is that basically the damage that's been caused, we took out the electricity, has led to potential risks inside the facility at the moment. There isn't at the moment any indication that radiation has escaped from the site. However, because they've lost electricity, with power stations of this nature, when you're dealing with uranium, you need to keep it cool. And we don't know yet whether or not any of the cooling systems have been damaged and whether that could lead to future problems at this site. Because when you're dealing with radioactive materials, obviously there is a risk if you don't keep them under the right conditions that they could cause major problems. So this is a major concern from Iran's point of view because the facility has been damaged and so it might not be safe going forward. But let's hear what's happened to the other facilities in Iran.
No damage has been seen at the site of the Fordow fuel enrichment plant or at the Kondab heavy water reactor, which is under construction. Bushehr nuclear power plant has not been targeted or affected by the recent attacks, and neither has the Tehran research reactor. At the Isfahan nuclear site, 4 buildings were damaged in Friday's attack: the Central Chemical Laboratory, a uranium conversion plant, the Tehran reactor fuel manufacture plant, and the UF4 to EU metal processing facility, which was also under construction. As in Natanz, off-site radiation levels remain unchanged.
So what we're hearing here is that one of the other facilities has been severely damaged as well. So I think what we're hearing here is that Israel have been very successful in terms of their targeted strikes on these nuclear sites so far. And I guess the risk from Iran's point of view is that the longer that this conflict goes on, the more Iran may decide that it wants to target more facilities and take out and cause more damage. So this is why Iran is now calling for Israel to stop. However, the reason that Israel is doing this is because it wants to stop Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. And obviously, the best way to do that from Iran's point of view would be to destroy all of their facilities.
Yesterday, our colleagues on Bloomberg Television spoke to the Minister of Strategic Affairs, Ron Dermer, and he said that their 2 objectives are, number 1, removing Iran's capabilities on the nuclear side, but then also removing their missile capabilities. No explicit mention, of course, of regime change, which is what many people have been speculating since this conflict kicked off. But in the absence of them achieving those objectives, you have to wonder how much real chance there is for a diplomatic breakthrough, given the lack of success that there have been on other fronts, as you were just alluding to, Tom.
So I think that's an interesting point that Israel are now targeting ballistic missile sites as well, because the other risk from Israel's point of view, if you've heard Netanyahu speaking, is that he believes that Iran is building up a huge arsenal of ballistic missiles, and it could send a barrage of these missiles to Israel at some point in the next 3 years. So in order to prevent that, alongside the nuclear development, Israel is now targeting all of the weapons and the missile sites in Iran. And as you just said there, nobody can really see an end in sight to this conflict until Israel achieves its objective, because unless Iran is going to sign up to a categorical agreement that it will never develop uranium beyond 5%, then Israel's unlikely to pull back. And interestingly, back in 2015, an agreement like that was signed, but Iran was seen to be breaching it. They didn't officially say they were breaching it, but clearly if they've developed uranium to 60% or maybe even 80% has been reported elsewhere, then they've gone way beyond what they agreed to do. So what's the summary and conclusion today? Well, I wanted to post this video because I think what's going on in the Middle East right now is one of the biggest concerns for the global economy in 2025. We have seen Israel launching wave after wave of attacks against Iran, and Iran is retaliating. However, a lot of the Iranian missiles are being taken out by the Israeli defense system. And as I talked about in a previous video, Israel is far better equipped for this conflict. It's been investing more than 5% of its GDP into defense for at least the last 5 years, if not the last 20 years. It's got really advanced weaponry, and it's also got a really advanced defense system. And Iran basically can't compete with that. This is not a fair fight. So if this conflict goes on, it's likely that Iran is going to be severely damaged. It's going to see lots of its facilities being targeted and blown up. It's going to see lots of its weaponry taken out, and it's having limited success in terms of its own retaliation. So Iran has now decided that it doesn't want to continue with this conflict. However, as we've heard, Donald Trump is saying, well, you had 60 days to agree a deal. This is what Israel allowed us to do. They said, okay, we will stand back and allow a deal to be done. A 60-day time period was set for that. Iran didn't sign that deal. It wasn't something that they were looking to do, and it looked like it was going to just drag on for a prolonged period of time. Israel decided that enough was enough, and they launched their attacks on the 14th of June, and those attacks are still continuing. So Iran is basically now looking for help, for somebody to mediate and bring this war to an end. However, as we've heard in today's video, I think it's unlikely that Israel will agree to that, because they are now dead set on taking out those nuclear facilities and also lots of Iran's weaponry, to basically put Iran back maybe 5 or 10 or 15 or 20 years. So it doesn't look like this conflict is going to end anytime soon. And the reason why I've made this video is because the markets are now starting to realize that. We are seeing share prices starting to fall. We've seen oil prices rising to their highest level for quite a long period of time. And both of those factors tell us that there are concerns for the global economy for the rest of this year, because if oil prices go up, not because there's an increase in global demand as everybody's doing really well and therefore we can afford to pay more for oil, but because there are risks to the global supply of oil, then that's going to be bad news, because it's going to increase costs at a time when there's already uncertainty as to what's happening in the economy. And in addition to what's happening in the Middle East, we've also got Donald Trump's tariffs, which are going to have a big impact on the second half for the USA, because prices are going to be rising. Whatever those tariffs come out at, whatever's agreed with each individual country, the bottom line is that prices in the USA post those tariffs being introduced will be higher. So they might be 10% higher, they could be 30 or 40% higher in some cases. And as we've talked about previously, this isn't just cheap imports that you can just buy something else for. A lot of the imports going into the USA are for US businesses who've outsourced part of their manufacturing process or their components or parts. They're importing them from other countries like Mexico, Canada, all over the world. And so when there's an increase of 10 or 15 or 20%, that's going to increase the cost for all of those companies, and therefore will increase the end price of products that are basically American. So you might think that you're buying an American product, but actually, if any of it is made anywhere else in the world, it will have an impact in terms of those tariffs. So the USA economy is going to be affected. We've already talked a lot about the fact that China is struggling at the moment. Its biggest export market is the USA. It's seeing a fall in the volume of exports it's sending to the USA, but it's also struggling with regards to the property sector and deflation and producer prices. So the two biggest economies in the world are already on a knife edge in terms of what growth they're going to see in 2025. And this war in the Middle East, pushing up prices and causing more uncertainty and potentially more disruption to global trade, is going to make things worse. And so the likelihood of the second half of 2025 being worse than the first half is now much greater. I think it's probable that the second half will be weaker than the first half. The first half of 2025 has already been questionable in terms of the growth. We've seen continued reductions in the outlook for the whole of this year by various agencies. And so the longer that this war goes on, the more disruption it's going to cause, the more likelihood is that we'll see the stock market starting to come down. We could see oil prices continuing to go up. And all of that means that the likelihood of a global slowdown and possibly even a global recession at the end of 2025 is now much greater. So hopefully you've enjoyed today's video. You found it useful, informative, and thought-provoking. If you've liked what I've said, then please give me a thumbs up. Thank you for everyone for watching this video all the way through to the end. And thank you so much to everyone that's supporting me. If you've bought me a coffee or sent me a YouTube super thanks, really appreciate that. Thank you so much for your generosity. And if you're a long-term supporter, either through Patreon or YouTube membership or Buy Me a Coffee membership, thank you for that support. It really blows me away just to think about it. It really keeps me motivated on making more videos. And here's something to put a smile on your face.